There you go. Robert Welch, who's Director of National Center for Cannabis Research and Education. Robert, good morning, sir. How are you?
Good morning, Paul. How are you this morning?
I'm good. Little throat issues, working through that, though, so excuse the gravelness. Just put some information on it.
And thank you for having me back. I appreciate it.
Certainly. Well, I got to ask, what's the updates? First of all, for people who don't know what's going on at the National Center for Cannabis Research and Education, just a little bit of an update in case we have some first-time neophytes joining the program.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. I'm happy to give that update. We are kicking into high gear now, so to speak. So thankfully, we had a lot of support at the legislature. Senators Kevin Blackwell, Nicole Boyd, Reginald Jackson, Rod Hickman, and Sarita Simmons have sponsored a bill that allows us to move forward with a lot of the research projects that we've been thinking about doing, planning to do. Now we have a formal partnership with the Mississippi Department of Health and their Mississippi Medical Cannabis Program. So we're going to be working very closely with them to determine really the health effects of these products on the patient. So now there's over 40,000 patients that are taking these products. And so we want to find out what's working, what's not working, what we might can help to identify to maybe change in the future. So we're looking forward to all this work, and it's going to be helpful, I think, to practitioners and the patients and lawmakers and policymakers.
Was some of that already gathered prior to us becoming a legal state for medical marijuana, though? Some of that.
It's a good question because we have been involved since 1968 at the University of Mississippi, which, Paul, but just for the listeners at home, that we have had this program, but that's through a very specific federal program through the National Institutes on Drug Abuse. So we, over all these decades, we have provided research materials for folks who wanted, institutions and entities who wanted to study the effects of cannabinoids and cannabis. We've provided those materials, but it's very specific in what the DEA and what NIDA wants to see out of those products. Yeah. And so this focuses all of our expertise and leverages our expertise within the School of Pharmacy and the Natural Products Center now into looking at the state of Mississippi and hopefully more broadly in the whole country to help identify some of those issues that we think are important.
I'm a little amazed at this because actually you think about it, this research should have been going on for a long, long time before anybody, even day one, the first state that went to medical marijuana, to even call it medical marijuana, which is a misnomer. But that said, if you get that information, and again, this is going to be going in unison with the School of Pharmacy, that how does this product work with, let's say, your blood pressure medicine?
Great question. And that's one of our aims. One of our we've identified through the bill, we've identified 5 major projects that we're going to focus on. And one of those projects is drug interaction studies. So we have a whole lot of people at the university who have expertise in drug interaction studies, in vitro, in silico, which simply means computer programming. We can model computer programs to see if this could have effect in humans. And we also could have the capability, at least with CBD or the non-intoxicating cannabinoid, we could do in human studies as well to test some of those effects and see, because you're right, Paul, think about polypharmacy is this term that people throw around, and that just simply means people are on a variety of medications. So they're not just, to your point, they're not just taking medical cannabis, they're on all their other medications. So we need to see the effects of that. And that's one of our main projects.
Because I don't see how a doctor, given that he or she wants to do the absolute best, how you can say, okay, I'm going to write you a script for this. I see you're taking this drug, that drug, as far as blood pressure medicine. He doesn't know, or she doesn't know, actually what the components are of the marijuana. How do you even know? It's a shot. It's just you're shooting an arrow in the air. You don't know where it's going to come down.
Well, and one of the things that we're going to look at to that point is we have a very robust, it's called a seed to sale program in the state. So a lot of states have this to where they can track the specific products that have a specific ratio of, let's say it has a 20 CBD to 1 THC ratio. So we can look at the effects of that particular product and how it's affecting patients through a program. We're going to look at patient outcomes. This is called real world evidence, in conjunction with my colleague, Dr. John Bentley. And so that's going to be important to look at all that information to see if we can determine how to better educate not only the certifiers in the program, but other doctors. Because you and I both know, Paul, that Ms. Smith, her regular physician doesn't certify for marijuana or medical cannabis, but she goes down the road. And so there's to a certifier. So now she's seeing two different practitioners. And so hopefully we can educate the whole lot and make everybody a little more aware of how this could affect their current prescription drugs.
Professor Robert Welch, who is the director of the Cannabis Research at Ole Miss, have you heard or seen, and I doubt very seriously any member of the state legislature or anybody else has heard anything about some cases that have gone wrong where people who do have a medical marijuana card with their regular medication has probably had an adverse effect? Are we compiling that data?
Yes,
and
we're going to compile. Yes.
Are you getting it?
Yes, we're going to be getting that data for sure. One of the main things, the main thrust of this is patient safety.
Yeah.
So we're really going to focus in on that as well, because as a pharmacist, I agree with you. I think we need to know about some of that. Now, I will tell you that over the years, there are a few prescription formulations that are cannabis based.
Sure.
One of them, there's only one that's plant derived, but the other three are synthetic products. And so we do have a good bit of data on the effects of other drugs on those particular products. And there, Paul, there is this situation of cannabis use disorder that patients can have that particular condition. And that is usually, though, Paul, that's caused by higher amounts of THC and frequent dosing. So that is a concern, and we're also going to be doing some work in that arena as well.
Professor, have you heard of any doctor saying, okay, since you're on medical marijuana, you don't have to take these drugs that you were taking? Have you heard anybody replacing some or supplanting those because of now on medical marijuana?
Sure, and that's one thing that a lot of patients and physicians and practitioners, nurse practitioners, they kind of think that they really would like to see a reduction in that polypharmacy issue. So they're thinking, well, maybe this could replace, but what you have to be careful about that, because you don't want to pull other drugs too quickly, especially for those for pain. If patients are taking pain medications, opioids, and they're wanting to reduce. Now, it helps when you're reducing and tapering down those opioids and those narcotics, but you have to be kind of careful with that and not just pull patients off of their regimen.
When you say, we got to take a break here, just enough time to answer this quickly. When you say that there are 5 different areas you're looking at, one was the interaction. Can you give me the other 4 when we come back?
Sure, absolutely. Yes, sir.
We'll do that with Robert Welch, professor and director of the National Center for Cannabis Research and Education. Coming up next.
Thank you.
Professor, Director of National Center for Cannabis Research and Education, Robert Welch. All right, we were talking about the number one of the five. Some of the other things that are on your mission statement.
Yes, the five main projects, and this is really mirrors the Senate Bill 2888 that's now law that Governor Reeves signed. So number one is basically education focus, being a clearinghouse for medical information in this arena, doing conferences, consultations, and that sort of thing. The second one is a research funding initiatives where we will partner with other entities potentially to apply for federal funding for certain specific research projects that meet some of the aims of our work. The third thing is the patient outcomes, like I mentioned, the real world evidence, to where we can take the people who are already on these products and they agree to sign up for the study, that we can track their outcomes. And that's going to be very important. Number four is, like I mentioned, the drug interaction studies. We have just it's amazing, Paul, the number of experts we have. And I'm so grateful to them to help me do all this work. I couldn't do this just by myself. I can promise you that. And the last thing is CBD cannabis extract oral solution, which we have been making, Paul, for a clinical study at Batson Children's. Dr. Brad Ingram's the principal investigator. So severe refractory epilepsy patients have been on a product that we make. So we're hoping to expand that as well in the future. That's on down the road, but that's one of those main projects.
When I'm just thinking, you guys are like, and most research places are like this, a giant vacuum cleaner. You're trying to suck in as much data as you can, because especially now with AI, the more you can get in, you can't take in too much information. Are you getting that from the medical marijuana industry, from the growers, people like that, not only the health department, but everywhere else?
In terms of them utilizing AI for some of these?
No, in terms of maybe some data that you've requested from them that you can use. In other words, the more data, and I guess you guys are using AI in some form of fashion.
Yes, and we actually have an AI specialist within the Natural Products Center who's going to be helping us with some of these projects. And to answer your question, yes, they're actually. I was just talking to a laboratory expert, a gentleman that runs a third-party testing lab up in New York, and he has gathered data from nearly every state that has a medical cannabis program on their testing data. And so he is utilizing AI to suss that data out and determine what seems to be effective, what do we need to focus on to fix, and those types of things. So it is helpful. Yeah. It's out of my scope of expertise, but I'm not an AI expert.
Do we have any other medicines that we're using, legal medicines that's gone through the FDA, kind of like marijuana, that are 100% plant-based?
You know, that's a good question. There are really only 3 products that have been approved that are plant-based. So they're called botanical drug substances. And so there's actually a specific FDA approval pathway that you can take for those drugs that are plant-based, plant-derived. And so, but there's only been 3 that have been approved for various a few different conditions, and so it's not very widespread, Paul. And so through our work, we're hoping to potentially work with FDA to think about that opportunity for us. I think that would be a no-brainer.
And then you talk about it for millennials, of course. That's how we got our medicines, through the forest and the grasslands. But is an aspirin also one of those, or now just synthetic?
Well, the actual it's a synthetic version of a plant-based product. Yes, sir. Yes, or a compound rather. Yes, sir.
Final question, and I wish we had more time. Always interesting, and love to get you back on. When do you expect to spit out something which will be a definitive? Here's what we've just found out. Anytime soon?
Well, we're working as hard as we can on some of these outcomes, but it's going to take a few months. Probably spring of next year, we should have some data from a small study to show what kind of effects and what kind of benefit, hopefully, we can have on this program.
Professor, it is always interesting. Thank you for taking the time. Appreciate it, sir.
Thank you so much, Paul. Appreciate you.
Robert Welch, Director, National Center for Cannabis Research and Education. Let's check news coming up next.